I'm Warren Thorngate. I'm a freshly minted emeritus professor, which means I'm old and retired, from a university in Ottawa, Canada, called Carleton University. I used to teach in the psychology department, and I still have an office there and go in now and then, but I'm otherwise happy.
Okay, sounds good. So I wonder if you could just briefly sort of give an overview of the talk that you just gave.
Yeah, it's one of a number of different interests I have. It's a talk that was focused on how we try to compare the output of simulations to real life, the data we collect in real life or observations we have in real life, and look at how well or badly they fit, the two of these things. And what I tried to argue is that traditional statistics really aren't very good. At best, they're awkward at doing that, and that there are other ways it might be simpler and easier. But that we do have to abandon our usual ideas about statistics and look at them in a fresh way. Mm-hmm. The notion I came up with is called ordinal pattern analysis, where you look at the patterns of orders of things and ask yourself the question, to what extent does the output of my model or simulation generalize to observations I happen to have available? And it's a pretty easy technique to use, and I think it's insightful. I was inspired to develop it after listening to, I guess at the time, a well-known BBC announcer named Dennis Parsons. Mm-hmm. He used to, I guess, be on a show called My Word, mm-hmm. From probably before you were born. But maybe not.
I'm older than I.
But he had a really creative idea that I stole and generalized, and so it was a methodological talk, but maybe it was useful.
Yeah, well, I think it was very useful. Now, agent-based simulation, agent-based modelling is still quite a minority sport, certainly in economics and social science. And I wonder if you could briefly say how you got into to this kind of way of modelling. Sure.
By accident. Most of my research during my regular career has been in the psychology of decision-making. Mm-hmm. A lot of that decision-making related to allocating limited resources. And many, many years ago, 1977 or 76, I became interested in a problem that was a big one of the day. Why is it that so many people are so bad at making decisions? The economists were telling us how we should make decisions. When you brought real people into a laboratory or a regular situation, they weren't doing it that way. And the idea at the time was, therefore, they were doing really badly. So I decided maybe we could I'll write a little simulation that would see just how badly people are. So I created a simulation that presented the computer with some standard economic decisions to make with probabilities and outcomes and values associated with the outcomes, and computed what the economic model says we should choose, mm-hmm. and then wrote a whole bunch of different little algorithms to mimic what psychologists knew about different ways that people really did make decisions, thinking that they would demonstrate what everybody thought, which was people are awful at making decisions. Well, it turns out that some of those little algorithms are really good at coming up with exactly the same decision as the sophisticated mathematical models, mm-hmm. especially the ones that ignore the probabilities that things will occur and just base decisions on values. And that got me to thinking, wow, maybe we're misguided here. Something's interesting that come out of that. Maybe we're not so bad after all, and it turns out we're not. And maybe instead of concentrating on how to improve people's abilities to make decisions, because even if they don't have much ability, they can do pretty well, maybe instead, if we want to improve their outcomes in life, we should start thinking about the environment or about the situations they face. Well, that got me out of psychology and into all the other, more interesting social sciences, because psychologists always like to zoom in on on the neurons these days to explain things that go on between the ears. But there are these determinants outside. So as then a rebel from psychology, I started to become interested in a little bit of economics and sociology and other groups that look at what goes on in the social world, the social environment. And that led to a number of different simulations every couple of years, always as an amateur effort, always published in obscure journals and never read, but it was still fun.
Join the club on that last score. So, I mean, you obviously have a very broad range of interests, and you must be thinking about all kinds of interesting problems and ideas. But if you could pick one current idea or problem that you're thinking about that you think is interesting, what would that be?
Well, I guess it's still my favorite. The one I've been interested in the most came by accident too, and that is how Canadian government research funding organizations make decisions about who gets research money and who doesn't, and what the implications are for the methods they use to make these decisions. So I had a wonderful opportunity over about a 20-year period to do two things. One was to be invited to come in on the secret meetings and sit at the back like a fly on the wall as a social psychologist to watch the group dynamics of these things, which is horrifying. Can I say that?
You have.
The pathologies that come out of those meetings are absolutely extraordinary. Yeah. And another was to try some simulations to see if there were ways that we could change the rules of order of conducting these meetings that would create what we'll call better decisions or fairer distributions of the limited resources of funds. I'll give you an example. One of them had to do with whether it's preferable to give many small grants to a lot of researchers or only a few big grants to only a few researchers. And what you can show is that in areas that are developing, it's far better to give many small grants to many researchers than it is to give a few to only a few researchers. So that led to a recommendation about that. Another one, a recommendation that they give more grants, smaller grants.
Did they act on that recommendation?
They never did, no. And the reason why is they said it's too costly for administration. It's better to administer 10 big grants and then leave it to the people to figure out what to do than it is to administer 1,000 small grants and have everybody complaining. So from the perspective of doing research, it's an irrational response. From the perspective of keeping the organization going, it's rational. And then it leads us to think, is that why we exist, to keep the organization going?
Oh, yes.
And so forth. So it was an interesting exercise. It also led to rules about how decisions are made in the committees. In the committees, just like any other group decision process, within about 15 minutes, people start to take roles. And there's the leader role, there's the follower role, there's the rebel role, there's the silent person roles that are taken by lots of people, there's the bulldozer role, there's the socio-emotional, oh, we're doing so well, let's go have a coffee kind of role.
Yeah.
And those get in the way of good decision making,
Right.
in part because people are not making decisions on the basis of what they see in the grants only. They're making decisions on the basis of what others around that group will think of them if they make that particular decision. And there's always an emphasis in these scientific groups on being really tough. You don't want to be nice and soft because then the people around the group will think, oh, Frank's gone soft. He's allowing this not so rigorous idea to happen. So a lot of really good ideas get quashed in favor of the ones that are really pretty well established. And that means that science doesn't progress as fast or as well as it could.
Yeah, I have some experience of this kind of thing, and what you say chimes very well. And I think the European Commission is going through a process of trying to work out how to allocate research funding in good ways. But that's another story. Now I'm going to ask a really difficult question and a big one. But in your sort of career in general, if you were to pick one formative book, lecture or paper that changed the way that you saw things or influenced your direction of research and practice, what would that be?
Well, let's
Not a
see.
fair question, I admit, but I'm going to try.
It's hard to pick just one. So
Sure.
can I pick two?
Yeah, of course.
One's a book, and that's called The Winner Take All Society. It's a book by two economists, Cook and Frank, or is it Frank and Cook? One
I'm
of them.
not sure.
About what happens when you design a society so the winners get the bulk of the goodies and the losers get nothing. And that's related to this topic I have about competitions and contests. I published a book recently called Judging Merit that looks at how things get allocated and how small mistakes in doing that in big contests can lead to disastrous results. So that certainly made me think, oh my goodness, there's somebody else out there looking at it, and changed my mind. That was a good one. There's another, it's a paper, 1974. It was by a mathematical biologist named Anatol Rappaport and
I know this
a
guy, yeah.
biologist named Slobodkin. Rappaport, who was also a classical pianist, and used to give concerts.
Wasn't he responsible for submitting the, we call it look-back strategy in Axelrod's tournaments, in game theory tournaments? Anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, they wrote this paper called, let's see, what was it? Something a biological, no, see, wow, I can't even remember the title, but here was the idea.
Okay. We'll put a link to this paper below this video.
The Rappaport-Slobodkin paper.
Yeah.
What they basically said is that if organisms want to survive, they have a rational strategy to pursue, and that strategy tries to reach a particular goal. And it turns out that goal is different than the goal that economists say defines rationality. And here's the difference. Economists say what's rational is what gets us the most in the long run. In biology, they say a rational strategy is what gives us a long run.
Right, yeah, survival.
So getting a long run in the first place is much different than assuming you do have a long run and then trying to maximize what you get in the long run. And we did some simulations to look at what the implications that may have for the kinds of decisions people make. And whoa, all of a sudden you discover that a lot of the things that are perceived economically irrational are biologically perfectly rational.
Yeah.
Okay? And one of them is, when you think the world is getting better, be conservative. Don't take chances. When you think the world is getting worse, take chances.
Right.
And that's not a prescription of economic modeling at all.
Right.
So that got me, it's just a new way of looking at things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Finally, a final question here, again a difficult one, which is looking forward, kind of making a kind of prediction. What area, if you could pick a particular area where you think agent-based modelling and simulation may have some significant policy impact in the future, where would you look?
Well, I would say in policy decision making, I think there's an enormous potential to make use of these tools to try to indicate to policymakers, and in Canada they say they're politicians, but it's really upper level bureaucrats, many of whom are quite educated and very dedicated to their work, and God bless them, to get them to be able to see some of the implications of what they're doing. And I've seen it being a bit effective that way. In the case of doing some of the simulations of the ways in which money is allocated for funding agencies, there were actually a couple of recommendations that they accepted. And the organizations seemed to think that it improved the way things went. There were fewer complaints about injustices and so forth. And it was only a small example, but I look at other policies that the Canadian government is making, at least, and maybe because I'm a convert, I keep thinking, God, they should have done a modeling of that beforehand to see some of the implications that could occur. So I think there's a huge potential in that.
Okay, well, Warren Thorngate, thanks for answering these questions, and also thanks for a really entertaining and enlightening talk.